Look at the sun shining off the fragments of silicon.
All right, welcome to another installment of Fragments of Silicon. I'm your host, Adam, and joining me as always are my distinguished colleagues, Petty Fan and Golix.
Not sure what's distinguishing us, yes, but...
Well, you're blind and I'm not.
Alright, look here, fuckers.
I mean, we could always have you control the stream, Golix, since you are trained occasionally in that. So...
I'll allow him to do it. For now. No, kidding.
I'm gonna... Be glad we're not in the same studio, my friend.
Seriously, I can't... I don't think my focus level is appropriate for actually running stuff.
Well, it's only it's kind of a last resort thing. So, anyway, on that note, we should probably get to the personal news for the week. And as always, in recent times, we start with you, Petty, because we need eye updates.
I wish I could get an eye firmware update. Anyway, so I saw the ophthalmologist again today, and they said it's healing okay.
Mm-hmm.
The ulcer is still a little there, and as far as scarring is concerned, we won't really know until it's gone. Right now, where the ulcer's at, it's not enough in my line of vision that if there's a small scar, it shouldn't need to be corrected.
That's fortuitous.
Yeah, it really depends.
Well, hopefully things work out in the end.
Mm-hmm.
And
then, yeah, obviously not a whole lot going on because, I can hardly see.
That is a problem when it comes to, doing stuff.
Yeah. Tomorrow is my mom's birthday, so not really sure if there's much of anything we're going to be doing on that, just because I can hardly see. It's between paydays, and yeah.
Right. So it goes sometimes.
Yeah. And yeah, I think that's it from me.
All right. Well, Alex, it's your go.
Well, the office move is unsurprisingly been or the move into the new building has been delayed, so I'm working from home again this week, which not bad, but again, it's a little bit harder to get myself going out and doing things when I don't have a reason why I'm already out and doing things, so that's not super fun. But I'm not having a hard time getting my work done, so that's good.
Indeed.
Been enjoying the Teal Mask Pokemon DLC. I'm almost done with it. Though, I'm not sure, because apparently there's a bug going around about the way that the game keeps track of what opponent trainers you've beaten, where the number of trainers in the game now is longer than the list that it can keep track of. Aside from that, I'm almost done with it, but I don't want to bump into that limit on the fighting the extra powerful trainers in the DLC, and there's a patch coming next month to fix it, apparently, so in the meantime, I'll just tool around, I suppose, And I should probably get back to Splatoon 3 soon anyway, because I've taken a week off from that. Trying to think if there's anything else.
Don't strain yourself.
Yeah, I think that's about all.
All right. It's my go. Well, let's see. The big thing for me this week was keeping an eye on jury duty, since I mentioned, I think about a month ago, that I had been selected. Though I was number 459, if I'm remembering correctly, which is quite the high number. And the good news is I did not have to go in.
Yay!
Thankfully, I got the call, so to speak, that all trials or whatever for the week have been concluded, and thus, I don't need to worry about it anymore. Let's see. In other news, I have just acquired a Blue Sky account, mainly due to some fortuitous timing via a friend, and also recent mullings from, the big giant shithead.
Yeah, the crazy money man.
Yeah. So,
yeah, I didn't mention, but I got one too. I'm having a hard time finding people to follow.
It's not so much finding people to follow. It's Blue Sky's incomplete, quite frankly. Like, it's missing things like hashtags and DMs, which is some.
I mean, if incomplete is the worst problem you have.
Well, it's not the worst. It's just, the site's just quite frankly empty, no matter what anyone says and what settings, because it's invite only right now. So of course it's going to be empty compared to even a diminished Twitter or Threads or Mastodon. It's just, with Mastodon you have to actually figure out how that works. My point is, it's got some work to be done, but that's more, in case X goes to becoming a paid site. I'm pretty sure everyone who isn't Mac is going to jump ship completely. That happens. Let's see. In game news, or what I've been gaming this week, still playing through Quake 2. I will say you get a lot of Quake 2 in the current package of Quake 2. I'm playing through the new chapter, Call of the Machine, and that's a different beast than any other portion of Quake 2. Mainly because, how do I put this? It plays more like Doom. And more specifically, the the TNT Evolution Pack, or what's the other one? Final Doom.
Yeah, Final Doom.
Yeah.
The one that came out in the Windows 9X.
No. The one that bundled two Doom mods together that were really hard. It's TNT Evolution. I can't remember the other one.
Fuck. Yeah,
But it's significant. But it's significant because one of the hidden levels in this thing is called the Casali effect, after Dario Casali. He of Revenant fame. Yes, I saw that Civ 11 video. What of it? My point is there's a lot of enemies in this package that you wouldn't have seen in the 90s. Just like the hordes that you could have in Doom, but you couldn't have in like Quake or Quake 2 because of polygon counts and the power of 90s PCs. But you
Oh yeah.
can do now. But you can do now because Quake 2 is fucking ancient.
Quake 2 now could probably be run on your toaster.
Hmm. Yeah, you're not wrong. Like, anyway, also been playing quite a bit of Bit Trip Rerunner. Like, it's definitely a Bit Trip Runner game. Like, in all of its agonizing frustration. Like, yeah, I've never been that big of a fan of the Bit Trip Runner series, mainly because of its structure. I still have to play around with the level editor. Honestly, I've been waiting for the game to go live before I actually tinkered around with that in case it, couldn't upload levels and stuff. Probably going to do that tomorrow.
Mm. Oh, is it in early
Anyway.
access at the moment?
No. It was. I got a pre-release copy, but it's out now as of yesterday of recording. I mean, we sometimes get that. Games that haven't come out yet, but are able. We're able to play. Anyway, so yeah, that's my news for the week. So merrily we shall roll along to the interview portion of the broadcast, and it is our great pleasure to welcome to the broadcast Chris Kohler of Digital Eclipse.
Hello, thank you for having me on the broadcast.
Indeed. I'm like, gotta admit, this is a day that I didn't think would come, but
Yeah.
I'm like, because I've known of you for quite a while. Because I remember reading you when you were at Wired.
Yeah.
Back in the day. But that aside, we'd like to more formally begin things by asking this particular question. What got you interested in video games, both on a personal and a professional level?
What got me interested in video games? So I was kind of lucky. I was born in 1980, and so a lot of kids kind of born there who grew up in the 80s, didn't really, some of them weren't, allowed to have video games. Video games are very new, so you have a lot of different kind of origin stories there. But in my case, my dad was a very early adopter of home computers. We had a TRS-80 in the house when I was probably when I was born, I think, and he had an Atari 2600. And like he was really into like the technical and the kind of hacking side of things, and he I remember the first time I played Atari 2600, I was playing Atari 2600, like bootleg Atari 2600 games that he had copied onto like EPROMs, and he had built his own EPROM like reader for the 2600. And it's like, it probably was spending more money to copy them, the EPROMs, than he would to just go out to like probably KB toy stores and buy Atari games on clearance at that point. But it's like, it was just all about the can I do it sort of thing for him. And he like kind of got into a little bit of dabbling of like programming games on the TRS-80 and stuff like that. And so it was when we were like, my brother and I were like, we want an NES. Like it didn't really take very much convincing to have my parents like get us an NES, because they saw it, they understood like this is really cool. We were constantly upgrading our computers from the TRS-80 to like the Atari 800 to the IBM PCs, and then constantly messing around and opening that up and upgrading the motherboard and stuff like that. And like my dad was as into it as we are, so I always had opportunities from the NES, the SNES, Game Boy, and then, the wide world of things that we could find, on the computer. We got America Online very early and, could start scrubbing. I mean, I was on bulletin board systems as well, like, local dial-up things, and trying to download games in that respect, and found ZZT, Epic Games, their first game on a local bulletin board, and start making my own games with severe copyright infringement of Nintendo's characters. And so, yeah, I mean, I was just all into, anything and everything that I could get my hands on. And then, as my peers started, kind of peeling away from video game, culture, because we were all just steeped in that Nintendo Power NES culture. As they start peeling away from it in high school, I'm like, no, I still love video games. Video games are way better than girls, And so I just kept being a huge video game nerd. And as you say, I started freelancing when I was in high school. I was writing for On America magazine. I got really into Japanese games. I started getting this, understanding all these games I loved came from Japan. So then it became like, I want to go to Japan. I want to take Japanese courses. I started freelancing for On America magazine, which is a magazine that was all about Japanese animation and manga, very ahead of its time for the 90s, And that kind of led to freelancing for Wired. I founded the Game Life section, which was the first ever, web vertical for Wired that was solely devoted to video games. I ran that for 11 years. And now I'm at Digital Eclipse as editorial director, having been in the, did the media side for a long time, and had this wonderful opportunity to kind of jump off of that, quite frankly, kind of sinking ship and get into the video game development side of things with my friends at Digital Eclipse, and have been having a blast there for the last 3 years.
Right. Like I said, I remember reading your Game Life blog back about 2008, somewhere around there.
We started, yeah. I mean, we started it very early on. We started it in 2005. And I ran it until 2016. So yeah, I mean, it was right around the time that all of the blogs were starting up. You know what I mean? Basically, because Wired, the website kind of ran itself like a daily online news magazine. And I freelanced for Wired for a little while before we started Game Life. And it was like, every day, like 10 articles would go live early in the morning. And it was essentially like, publishing a little magazine every day. And then there became this sense that we could really ramp up the amount of content that was on the site if they hired, freelancers and said, okay, you're the editor of video games, you're the editor of gadgets, you're the editor of the sex blog, was one of the earliest ones that started up on the same time that like Kotaku was founded and Joystick was founded and Engadget and all of those. And so we were really part of that. And really it changed the nature, or I really saw an opportunity to change the nature of what kind of content was going out there. Because I feel like I was doing stuff in 2005, 2006, 2007 that a lot of other publications online were not, providing the kind of like analysis or very kind of offbeat content that got out of that kind of very publisher access centric news spin, news reviews previews kind of cycle too.
Right. It's also giving your focus was at a very interesting time in the industry, if nothing else.
It was great because, I mean, for me, I was I love, Nintendo and Nintendo consoles and stuff like that. Nintendo was just on this precipice of they were about to explode back into relevance with the Wii and the DS after the sort of the doldrums of the GameCube and the Game Boy Advance that they were in, and everybody was counting them out. And I mean, coming away from sort of like enthusiast games media, it's like they didn't even want to cover Nintendo at that point because they were so I had articles about Nintendo that were rejected and killed because it was like, no, Nintendo's dead. And so to be given the keys to the car on Wired, I was in this great position because I understood where this company was coming from. And so when the DS broke out and when the Wii broke out, I wasn't sitting around bewildered as to why that had happened or lacking the experience with like Nintendo's products to be able to accurately kind of like gauge what they were doing. And so I really wrote a lot about Nintendo in that era too, because it was just a big story for a long time.
Indeed. Like, yeah, you count Nintendo out to your own detriment, considering they've done that at least twice. Like, but anyway, so how did you end up at Digital Eclipse?
I had been, I've known, Mike Micah, Digital Eclipse's president, for like almost 20 years. I mean, I must have met him, at some point very early on when I moved out to San Francisco in the mid 2000s. So I always knew what they were doing. I've known Frank Cifaldi for more than 20 years. And so I knew, when they restarted the Digital Eclipse, brand in 2015, kind of rebooted the label as this boutique developer of, classic game re-releases with a higher degree of respect and a very different approach to re-releasing classic games. I was very aware. I mean, they're here in the area. They're in Emeryville, California. I live on the peninsula, like south of San Francisco, so it's very close to me. Basically, it was like we had talked a little tiny bit here and there about they were like, would you ever be interested in joining us and, working with us over here? And at the time we first started talking about it, it was like, not really. But then once I kind of made up my mind that I was gonna, get into the development, it was either going to be leaving media for development or publishing or, whatever it is. Just started talking to Digital Eclipse, and it just so happened to be like, right at the right moment. It's like they needed somebody to come in and run editorial, run all the historical research and the writing. I wanted to go over there at that moment, so it was just this sort of perfect timing on everybody's part.
Well, it's good that worked out for you. And
it's really exciting. At first I was like, oh geez, imposter syndrome kind of thing. Like, they don't know that I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm walking into a room full of people that have been in video game development for a really long time. But luckily it's like everything that I had kind of done in journalism, had sort of led up to this, because essentially, what we're putting out are these games that are very narrative focused, are very research focused. You need all of that that journalistic background essentially to figure out what the story is and do the research and put the story together. And then I just kind of lucked out. I'm just working with, this amazing team at Digital Eclipse of, incredibly talented programmers and engineers and designers and artists who are all kind of on board with the vision. A lot of people do actually have some media side experience from the top of the studio on down. So it's like everybody gets it. Everybody's kind of on board with what it is we're doing. So it was a surprisingly natural fit. It's been great.
Yeah, we've had some Digital Eclipse folks on the program previous to this, back in March, actually. But yeah. So what have you worked on in your 3 years prior to the making of Karateka?
Yes. Well, the funny thing is, when I joined in 2020, a little over 3 years ago now, the first thing they put me on was the making of Karateka, because this was a project that actually preceded me. There was an older version of this that we were working on as this internal, independently produced interactive documentary style release. But most of the people that were working on it were gone. And so it was handed to me and given to me you can propose that we totally redesign this if you want to do that. And so for a while I started working on Karateka, and the initial version, kind of when I came in, was a little bit more of a classic. It was a little bit more of like a traditional kind of retro collection approach, where it's like you have games over here, you've got a museum, which is kind of like a bunch of design documents, stuff like that, kind of sorted by category, not really a narrative. And then, there was this interactive documentary concept that was very kind of rigidly linear, with film clips interspersed with interactive elements. Basically, we kind of looked at this whole thing, and I realized that, Jordan Mechner, the thing that makes the making of Karateka so interesting is the fact that we're able to tell this day-by-day story. And that's really all down to Jordan Mechner, who created Karateka back in '84. He's also the creator of Prince of Persia. That's probably how you best know him. But he kept a daily journal. And he kept a daily journal when he was making this game when he was a college student at Yale University. He keeps a daily journal, everything that he was doing every day. And then we're able to take that journal, and he did all of his design documents on paper, and then he donated all of that paper to the Strong Museum of Play in Rochester, New York. And then he kept all his floppy disks, and Jason Scott, Tony Diaz, some other people like from the Internet Archive about 10 years ago had gone back and gotten all the data off of those floppy disks. So I kind of realized, looking at all this wealth of material, that like we could really tell this actually narrative story, because we can take the journals and we can use that journal as like the Rosetta Stone to figure out what all the design documents were and when they were made and in what order they were made. And the same thing with the stuff that was on the floppy disks, because you could find a half of a sprite on the floppy disk, but with the journal, you could understand what that was. And so for me, it was like, I rewrote the whole thing in this sort of narrative timeline kind of structure. And then we had to stop working on it, because essentially, because it was an internally developed thing, it was like a downtime project. And it was like, we can work on this when we're between big licenses or big projects that come in that we have to do as like a work for hire type thing. And we had and basically what ended up happening was, in rapid succession, a bunch of those projects came in, and Karateka had to get backburnered. And so I ended up, right after I finished a few months on that, we signed a Blizzard Arcade Collection. And that was really great as far as I'm concerned. I thought we did a great job on that. Not only bringing back Blizzard's classic games in Rock and Roll Racing, Lost Vikings, and Blackthorn, but doing multiple versions. We did 32X Blackthorn on that thing. There is actually, again, like there's a narrative kind of thing in the museum where we go over the early history of Blizzard, and did a whole bunch of research to pull together as many artifacts and things like that as we could have in that historical section. And then after that, I worked on Disney Classic Games Collection, which was adding the Jungle Book and the SNES version of Aladdin to our previously existing Disney product that we had in the market. And so I wrote the museum for that, did a whole bunch of research, dug into the source code for the Jungle Book games, which was fascinating. Got to do like a deep dive in that and pull out unused sprites and stuff like that. And then Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Cowabunga Collection about the same time kind of rolls around. I was working on those two like simultaneously. Cowabunga Collection, we were able to get into Konami's vast archives in Japan and scan every single piece of paper that they had related to the Turtles games, which was a lot. It was like almost literally thousands.
I imagine that felt like a bank heist at that time.
Oh, incredible. I mean, the best part of the job is when I get the email from somebody saying, okay, I've got stuff for you, and there's like a 2 gig zip file attached, and like getting to open it up is like Christmas. And so like when I just
over in the back are like, what the hell are they doing?
Yeah, I just remember opening up that zip file from Konami and just opening up a random folder and just pulling up an image, and it's literally just like a penciled design document from somebody designing out like a level in Turtles 1 for the NES. And it's just like, oh my God. And the important thing is, from our perspective, it's like, we got to make sure we get as much of this in the game as possible, because this is our one and only shot to like take this stuff that's been buried in somebody's archive for the last 30 years and actually publish it again and get it onto a form that people can see it. And so we localized all of it too. We every one of those pieces of paper, there's like a floating localization overlay basically, so you can actually read, because these documents are just full of like designers like chicken scratch Japanese handwriting, and to be able to go in and read it and understand it is just, I mean, it's fascinating. And then when we were going to start on Karateka again, we even had a meeting, and like, Drew Scanlon was going to be the producer of Karateka, and we had a whole meeting about like, how are we going to finish this, what's left to do, and we kind of like start building a schedule. And then Atari 50, the anniversary celebration happens, and it's all hands on deck for that. And so basically, once we finished Atari 50, we were finally able to go back and revisit not only the making of Karateka, but our full plan for the Gold Master series, which is the series, the branding, the series of interactive documentaries that's part of, and to start working on those in earnest. And so now, Making of Karateka is out there. Number 2 in the Gold Master series is we are, hard at work on that, and that's coming out pretty soon. So that it's been great to get to go back and to really finally take those games to the finish line, as that's really what I started doing. And I've been like For 3 years, I've just been like, hey, remember, we got to finish. We got to do Karateka. We got to do Karateka.
Well, I'm not exactly sure what to say with that, but other than it got over the finish line.
It did, and we're really just grateful for the reactions to it because, obviously it's a big risk. I mean, even Atari 50, which was our first game that we would say is in the interactive documentary genre, that was a risk as well because, essentially the key thing about Atari 50 is the games themselves are almost sort of put to the background and we're leading with the narrative museum experience, like you're walking through a digital museum that's telling you the story of Atari. And that's the key user experience. When you press start, you don't go to a menu that says, games, museum, options, whatever. You press start on the title screen and it just drops you into the museum, the timelines. And you're meant to just sort of start going through in a chronological way. And that could have backfired. People could have been like, wait a minute, what is this? I don't like reading. Where are my video games? And they might have gotten confused or wondering, why this is what's being put in front of them by default. But instead, everybody
they did
really
buy
got
a
it.
game called The Making of Karateka.
Exactly. Well, I mean, the thing with Making of Karateka is that now it's like with Atari, the Anniversary Collection, it had over 100 games in it. The Making of Karateka has like 14 different playable experiences, but fundamentally, it's really it's the story of one game, and you don't even get to, if you're going through the timelines, you don't even get to the main game until the end of Timeline 3. So it's like, are we going to be able to hold people's attention that whole time? And we think that, based on people's reaction to it, it seems like it's working. So that gives us a lot of confidence, moving forward with this this format in the future. But we really think this is how you have to present classic games. It's like you can't just give somebody a ROM file. It's got to be like, here's the game, but here's who made it, and here's how they made it, and here's why they made it, And if we can tell those stories, we can reach more people than just the people who are sitting around going, gee, I wish they would re-release Karateka for the Switch. I just want to play Karateka again. Because you can sell that game to those people, but that's not enough. That's not growing the audience, and it's like doing a disservice to these games.
It might depend on the game, because we encounter many retro games. We know quite a few people who, I guess, work in the retro gaming business, as it were, and there's probably not one approach to it, especially depending on how complicated the game is. Like, there's a world of difference between Karateka here and like some of the stuff Night Dive has been putting out this year, and Rise of the Triad and Quake 2. And it's like, I'm wondering, could you do this interactive experience for a game made in like the 90s for the PC or something like that?
Absolutely, we could. It's just a question of what can we get the rights to, what makes sense. I absolutely think that there are games out there. There's a selection of games out there that are so popular and so perennially popular, and the franchises are still so impactful that you're right. All you have to do, you can take the game itself, you can re-release it, and you're going to find a huge audience for that. But that will sort of diminish over time. I think that, for example, like with Atari, in the 90s, there were Atari collections on PlayStation, and the Atari, some of those games were barely even 20 years old at that point. So you still had people that were like, oh man, I really just want to play Asteroids on my PlayStation. Like, there's people sitting around just waiting for that to happen. Today, I don't think that those people are really out there as nearly as much as they were. So it's like you have to revisit it in a different way. You have to get across to people, because it's not sort of a built-in assumption that like this was a great game, or what the appeal of it is. And so I think there is a grouping of games out there, like the stuff that Night Dive is bringing back. There's people that are sitting around waiting for System Shock or whatever it is to come back. but what you can do with an interactive documentary is you can take games, and it's not just us. I think if you look at and I don't know if limited run games is like calling what they're doing with Plumbers Don't Wear Ties, a documentary, but essentially what they're doing is they're not just selling you Plumbers Don't Wear Ties, which is like one of the lowest rated video games ever made. They're promising that they're going to sell you an amazing story, a behind the scenes story of how this sort of famous, box office bomb of a movie was made. And it's much more interesting. And I think for the vast majority of games out there are things that people might have the rights to them, but they might not consider bringing them back because they're like, well, is anybody going to buy that? And it's like, well, we're not going to sell them that. We're going to sell them a really interesting story, and that game is going to be a part of it.
Right. Once again, it depends on who's handling what and things of that nature. And that seems like a good segue into the Gold Master series.
Yes.
Because from what I've been able to gather, you're kind of billing this as gaming's Criterion collection.
That's something that I don't want to say nobody has ever said that at Digital Eclipse, but like we're kind of trying to put it out there as its own thing. I think people are making that connection, and I think the connection works when you talk about the aspirations that what we want to do with it is when you see that the Criterion collection has published a Criterion essentially edition of a film. If you've never heard of that film, you say, oh, I've never heard of this, but Criterion Collection is telling me this is something that I need to watch. And they're going to also, not only are they going to show me this movie, but they're going to like give me the background and the information that I need about it to like understand why they're putting it forth. And by A, I should just watch this, and B, I'm going to learn something when I do. And so like if we can get the Gold Master series to that point that people say, oh, the Gold Master series, and then it doesn't even matter what the game itself is, but they grab it because they know they're in for something really cool, and we're going to help them through it essentially, and we're going to talk about the history, we're going to tell them a story about it, and they're going to come out with an increased appreciation for like why this particular game is a landmark game, or a landmark designer or developer or publisher, or whatever kind of story it is we're going to tell. If we can get to that point, we would be very happy. Yeah.
And I'm not sure if this is a question you can answer at this point in time, but I do have to at least put it forth. And it's like, do you have an amount of Gold Master releases in mind?
Right now, as I think I said earlier, we're hard at work on number 002. And beyond that, it's going to be like what we're able to, again, like what are we able to get the rights to do? Like, do people see the first couple of these and get excited and want to come work with us? Yeah, I mean, right now, the only known quantity is number 2,
which is understandable, given how unproven things are still. Because you mentioned that the making of Chronica here is done seemingly reasonably well, but I suppose that's not necessarily a series yet.
Right. I mean, the important thing is it's really it's about like stories that we think are important to tell in video game history. And just because of our belief that again, whether or not every video game needs this sort of treatment when it's re-released, we certainly think that this is the best way to tell the story of a video game or a video game developer, as opposed to a Netflix documentary series or a book about video game history. I mean, those absolutely have their place, but like we really feel like connecting people with the stories of video game history is best done through the interactive storytelling medium of the video game itself. Because I mean, quite frankly, for the reason that it allows you to get hands-on with the game itself, but then it allows us to illuminate the text, as it were, with all the contextual information, and it allows us to actually blend those things together, like having Jordan and Francis Mechner do director's commentary over the Apple II version of the game.
I did see,
and then letting you as a player, while you're listening to the director's commentary, press a button and instantly be playing that game as well. Which is something that it's like when I'm watching a Netflix documentary about a video game, I'm thinking like, oh, I want to play that game. I want to like stop watching and play.
I mean, maybe that's something that could be on Netflix eventually, given that they're in the video game space.
Wouldn't that be great? I think that would be amazing. I think it would be fantastic if like you could be literally on Netflix on your device, and then it's like, oh yeah, this is this was Super Mario Brothers. Here, try playing it. And then you get to play it for 5 minutes.
That'd be interesting tech if Google Stadia didn't die.
Right? I mean, Google Stadia died, but Google still has the tech.
Yeah.
It's like it's. And from what I remember, Google's like licensing that out still. So that dream is not necessarily completely dead. Anyway, so where did the Gold Master thing first arise from? Like, at what point did you attach this label to the making of Karateka here?
That predates me also. Like the earliest sort of build of Karateka that I looked at and kind of like did a review of when I joined the company had the Gold Master series, branding kind of attached to it. And the idea was, I think at first the idea was like, take a game that was a landmark game that was very important to take like this one single game and do a high-end release of it. And because we were doing it, we were independently publishing and doing it all internally, it's like we could craft a series around it, and that series could be made up of multiple games licensed from different sources. And because basically it's like, because we're not a publisher, because it's not like Nintendo or whatever it is with like they have their library of games they're going to put out, because we're going out and individually pulling things in, we can take it all and put it all under an umbrella that wasn't really there before. And so I think that was the idea, and the idea was sort of naming it after the idea of the Gold Master disc, the final disc that is pressed with the final version of the game that goes off to manufacturing. But just the idea that like these are the the golden oldies, as it were, the games that need to be looked at again today because they were so important, because they were so influential. And essentially, the idea again that we would be the tastemakers in this case, and that you'd be looking to Digital Eclipse to go and like identify these games that should be part of this collection, this series. That you might not necessarily think yourself would be something that would be important, but that we're going to tell you why that is.
Right. Because, Karateka, obviously it's an important game, but it's, it's not Super Mario Brothers or Pac-Man or Sonic the Hedgehog. A game that's just, part of gaming history and part of like the bigger pop culture.
Yeah, well, you bring up an important point here, because why isn't it Super Mario Brothers or Pac-Man, or the thing is, those games, their stories get told. There's these certain stories of video game history that get told and repeated, and in the U.S., a lot of that is it's this story, quite frankly, of Atari started in the 70s, and then there was an Atari crash, and then nothing happened for 2 years until Nintendo kind of rode in on a white horse and saved video games in 1985. And like that's like true-ish if you're just talking about like the American video game console market, but it's not true in the rest of the world, and it's not true if you're talking about personal computers, because the personal computer space was very vibrant in the late 80s after the Atari crash, but before Nintendo came back, and they were selling millions of units, and the games were big hits, and they were played by tons of people all over the world, and they were very influential. But the thing is, a lot of the stories kind of get cut off, and so with Karateka in particular, we're taking this opportunity to revisit that and say, hey, like, Karateka, it inspired John Tobias, co-creator of Mortal Kombat. When he was making Mortal Kombat, he was thinking about Karateka. It inspired John Romero. It inspired Tom Hall at the beginning of id Software. Like, they point to Karateka as this game that totally changed their view of what video games could be, because it was this first game for a lot of people in which you really saw a little movie happening on screen. And that, like, if you look, video games today, if you look at like The Last of Us, if you like start asking the people who were in charge of making these games and like following the trail back to what inspired you, well, what inspired them, and a lot of the roads lead back to Karateka, and it actually should be considered, amongst the Super Mario Brothers and the Pac-Mans. But the question is, it's not about it's not like Super Mario Brothers was more influential than Karateka. It's that Super Mario Brothers had better PR and Pac-Man had better PR, that they're sort of enshrined as these games in video game history, whereas Karateka, which was very, very popular, does not get its due. And so I think you start looking and there's a lot of games like that. There's only certain stories that get told. And I'm as guilty of this as anybody, going back, 20 years to, doing, Retronauts or video game history articles or things like that. But, over the fullness of time, you start to realize that so many of those stories are essentially like the winners telling the story of history, and it's missing a lot of narrative threads, and it's less about like it's just about what stories are getting told, and so we're trying to correct the record in that sense.
Well, another thing to keep in mind about like the superstars of gaming is they keep themselves relevant via new games, new re-releases, new stuff all the time. Whereas, Karateka hasn't seen that in comparison.
Right. And it was really, it was really the prototype of Prince of Persia, essentially, because, what Jordan just sort of, immediately just sort of continued on with all of these things that he introduced with Karateka, cinematic camera, rotoscoped animation, a leitmotif soundtrack, all these, it innovated on so many different levels, so many axes all at the same time. That's when you get that quantum leap of a game, when it just innovates in every area simultaneously and pushes gaming ahead by a couple of years, essentially, when it's released, right? So Jordan moved on to Prince of Persia. And so Prince of Persia was sort of the sort of the fuller expression of all those things that he was doing. And that did become incredibly huge also, all over the world. And that did become a major franchise. That's getting a new game, in early 2024. And so, but even then, people have heard of Prince of Persia, but it's kind of like, it's, to me, it's like hearing about Super Mario Brothers 3, but not hearing about Super Mario Brothers 1,
Right. I can definitely see that happening. But once again, it's not a thing that Karateka is all that concerned with, given that it's just the one game, like mostly.
The making of Karateka?
Yeah.
Essentially, it is very much the story of Karateka. We do have to show, we essentially have to tell you that, yes, and then it sort of became Prince of Persia, and then we can't really go, any further than as far as we go right up to the edge of the line and then stop. But it's fortunate that Prince of Persia is as recognized as it is, because we can say very quickly, like, hey, Prince of Persia, then you got to check this out too.
Right. And I suppose on that note, one of the most notable features of the making of Karateka here is the new game in Karateka Remastered, and what you're interestingly calling Death Bounce Remastered, even though Death Bounce never actually released.
Yes, we called it Death Bounce Rebounded,
Rebounded.
because I love puns and you can never stop me. Yeah, so Karateka Remastered, Death Bounce Rebounded. So Karateka Remastered came first, and that was Digital Eclipse president Mike Micah, who was just a huge Karateka fan from back in the day. It was just one of his absolute favorite games from back in the day, and that's why that's why he reached out to Jordan. That's why we wanted to get the license. That's why we wanted to do it in the first place. But he was like, well, I want to take this opportunity and make my own, because he's always doing that. And he's like, I have this opportunity to make an official Karateka. He had tried to do a port of Karateka to the Amiga back in the day, and didn't get very far with it. He was a teenager. But he wanted to make another one, but he also wanted to do this thing of, I'm going to make a new Karateka, but then to go along with the fact that we're trying to tell a story, the fact that we're trying to go behind the scenes, to explore every facet of Jordan's original, he put in a director's commentary track in which he looks at, what he did right in making this remake, what he did wrong, how Jordan's original worked, how he had to grapple with that to try to recreate it, and really just try to get to the bottom, as a game designer, as a programmer himself, of this game that he loved. Like, how did it work? With Death Bounce Rebounded, it was so Jeremy Williams and Dave Reese, who, if you played Atari 50th anniversary celebration, Jeremy created Vector Sector, which is one of the new games, and Dave created Haunted Houses and Sword Quest Airworld.
Yes,
and
we had them on in March.
Oh, wonderful. That's great. So before they created those Atari 50 games, they did Death Bounce Rebounded, because this was something that we were doing back in 2020, 2021, as we were kind of working on, sort of revamping that project. And it was sort of a training exercise, because it's the first game that they had actually made in our internal engine, the Eclipse engine. And they, instead of simply just like getting a version of it up and running, to get them to familiarize themselves with the engine, they went further than anybody expected them to, and crafted this twin stick fast and frantic shooter that takes Jordan's prototype of Death Bounce and just like it's almost like it comes out of another reality in which Death Bounce actually did get published and had sequels, and then now this is the 2023 version. So I mean, it's super fun to play, and I love that everybody is just really excited about it and they love playing it, and it's just like it's such a cool thing. And Jordan, we surprised him with that. We didn't tell him we were making it, and we at the end of one of our calls, we kind of threw it in as a one more thing. And I think he's very excited that Death Bounce, which, he had to go through this struggles with, having it rejected. And he's very excited that it's finally, not only does his originals, they seen the light of day, but this brand new version that people are having fun with. And it's really important for the narrative because, well, first of all, it's this like triumphant kind of ending of the Death Bounce story, and it's like, and now Death Bounce is finally out, and now there's this new version you can play. But also because I think that it's tough to go back to a game from 1983 on the Apple II if you're a brand new player and feel the same excitement that somebody might have felt playing that shooter game then. But if we can give it a modern twist, then you can get a sense of like the core appeal of that gameplay, with the modern quality of life things like twin sticks and just a faster, smoother gameplay that you would expect. And so it's like it's just outreach to more people, more fans than the core group of people that might otherwise have wanted to go back and play an Apple II shooter.
Yes, I think that's something that got brought up in our review of the making of Karateka. And so speaking of such things, let us talk a bit about what's not in this documentary package. Because there is some stuff missing here. Like, for example, there are 3 ports or 3 versions of the original Karateka. The original Apple II version, the C64 version, and the Atari 8-bit version. But there are more versions of Karateka. Like, there's the Atari ST version, the Atari 7800 version, the Famicom version, and so on, and the MSX version, and so on and so forth. And I'm wondering, was there any attempts to get those versions of Karateka into this package?
I would have loved more than anything to do that. The basically Jordan owns the rights to the ones that were done, internally at Rotorbund. What you're talking about in most cases are games that other publishers essentially bought the licensed rights to Karateka. In some cases, those seem to be in total rights limbo. I mean, the most famous one is the Famicom version of Karateka, which, I mean, we've had a lot of people from Japan buying the making of Karateka because that was a really well-known game on the Famicom, and it would have been wonderful, from not only from a historical perspective, but just to be able to include that would have been great. But I mean, I have absolutely no idea where the rights to that would sit because they are with a Japanese publisher that seems to have disappeared off the face of the earth. Ultimately, I mean, we had the rights to what we had, and we had to go forward with that. This is not a huge budget game. There had to be some restrictions in terms of what we could show. Ultimately, what was in there is Jordan's Apple II original, and then you have the Commodore 64 and Atari 8-bit computer versions, as you say, and those were the ones that were personally overseen, by Jordan, and were not ported by him, but were ported up to his exacting standards. Right. But at the same time, you're right. I mean, this really was a worldwide game. A lot of people in the UK would have played it on the Spectrum. People in South America might have played it on the MSX. Obviously, from my perspective, I would have loved to be able to include those, but I wish it was something that we could have done, but it was not in the scope of the project.
That is completely unsurprising to me, given not just scope, budget, but also, we have talked to other retro people, and one of the things that continually comes up is the difficulty of acquiring rights to things.
Mm-hmm.
Oh boy, but I suppose I also want to address the most curious omission from this package, because it didn't even get a mention in anywhere in the making of Karateka here, and that is the Game Boy version, Karateka Master. Because this is a particularly interesting version of Karateka because it's not a straight port. It's kind of a RPG-ish reworking of Karateka, from what I remember.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, again, I think that goes with everything else. It would have been amazing to be able to get that in there, and it's not something that we were able to do. Yeah.
And I suppose the final question in regards to this particular line of questioning is, what about the 2012 remake of Karateka? Were there any attempts to secure that for this package?
That would have. I mean, now we're into the realm of a technical impossibility to take essentially a 2012 game that was developed in whatever language it was developed in. I mean, essentially port it or transfer it to a different engine, because again, this is not Unity, it's not Unreal, this is the Eclipse engine. This is a proprietary engine that we build in-house. And it's sort of custom made for developing new games, but also, to be able to easily ingest any kind of multimedia essentially that we want to pull in, whether that's emulators that we develop internally, emulators that we license from other people, audio, video, all that kind of stuff. It's kind of custom built for our purposes. So, essentially taking something that is as recent as a 2012 game, and there would be technologically integrating that into this product would not really be feasible.
Duly noted. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so it sounds like, given the resources allocated, you made the fullest package that you could with Karateka here.
That's the idea. Yeah, I mean, if we could put it in, we did.
Indeed. And how have you been taking the reception of the making of Karateka internally?
We're all very excited. It's being received really well. I mean, obviously, you've mentioned the same things that some other people did, that they wish that the Game Boy version or whatever it could have been in there, but that ultimately, we were taking from that we did the best job that we could with what we have, but that ultimately it's really important that people are coming away with this and saying, that they were engaged, that they were in for this idea of like following through an interactive documentary story. Then not only did they like the fact that we're telling a story, but some of the best reactions we get are from people who are finding themselves really connecting with that story and taking something away from it. I mean, that's what I want as a writer, right? It's for people not only to appreciate that the story exists, but to say, oh, this story really taught me something about, like, the value of rejection, how valuable that experience can be, about not giving up, about not stopping, about like creative problem solving, about like taking inspiration from the world around you, about not chasing what's popular now, but imagining what can be popular in the future. They're able to sort of take away lessons from the story. And so that for me is the most rewarding part of the whole thing, that not only are people accepting of using a video game to tell a nonfiction story in this way, but that they're really engaged with it.
And can you make any sort of comments on the sales numbers at this point in time?
Nothing that we've shared publicly. No.
Okay.
Yeah.
And has the Nintendo Switch version come out?
Yes. Yeah, it's available on PC, Switch, Xbox One, Xbox Series S and X, PS4, PS5.
Okay, because I remember the Switch version got delayed a bit for reasons unknown. We were able to have it day and date in North America, and basically then it got delayed by a matter of days in Europe and Asia. Yeah. I see. And let me see here. So, is there anything you can tell us about Gold Master title number 2 yet?
It's not. I can certainly tell you that it's not going to be the story of one game. It's going to look at at certainly a story that takes place over a period of decades. But it is certainly about a story in video game history that is worth looking back at. But and I can also say you really shouldn't have to wait that long. I mean, we are very much hoping to have it available this year. We're really just sort of putting the finishing touches on it now. It might not be. It might be early next year, but it's very, very soon. Or certainly we're gonna get to talk about it pretty soon. So not that long.
I would like to talk about it when it's ready to be talked about.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, but before we get to such matters, we do have to talk about Wizardry for a bit.
Oh, yeah.
Because, this just got announced a few days ago, I think, or certainly very recently.
We shadow dropped it on Friday. Yeah.
Yeah. Because, Digital Eclipse has just put out in Steam and GOG Early Access Wizardry Proving Grounds of the Mad Overlord. Yep. A 3D remake of the first Wizardry title. I'm wondering, how involved are you in this project?
Very little at this time. That was essentially it's not. I wouldn't want to say a separate team, but it was not a project that I was involved in because it didn't really have currently doesn't really have an editorial component. Now there's the other member of the editorial team, Dan Amrick, has actually been doing more work on that than I have, and so you'll see some of his work in that will be sort of like you'll start seeing it as we continue to like essentially issue updates, because it is, as you say, in early access. But basically, I mean, it's not something that I've personally been at work on, but it's been really exciting over the years, to watch it get to the state that it's in, and people are people seem very excited. I think people have been waiting a long time for essentially the first wizardry to come back, and we're really excited to be able to bring it back in that way.
Well, yeah. The first few wizardry titles have a lot of rights issues around them, let's say.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if you can share any insight into how you managed to navigate that particular labyrinth and get a version of Wizardry 1 onto the market.
I personally have not, but I mean, if you look at the legal lines, you can see that we've done a lot of talking with the Surtex Dracom, which is the Japanese company that publishes the wizardry games in Japan. And I mean, it's not my department. I mean, that's our head of publishing, and that works with them. But I mean, it is a not inconsiderable amount of rights, stuff and legal stuff that has all had to happen in the background to make this possible. So again, we are very excited to be able to be the ones who are able to do it, for sure.
Yeah. And are you giving any sort of consideration to having this wizardry in the Goldmaster collection, or is it going to remain what it is?
I don't know what's going to happen over the years, because it is in early access, and so it's really kind of a blank slate as to where do we go from here with this, and what do we consider what could we add in the future. And so right now, things are off to an encouraging start. People are really excited about it, and so come back to me in a year or two, basically, and we'll see kind of where it ended up. It's something that to do essentially a making of type thing, the sort of apply the interactive documentary format to this would be a whole bunch of work, but we would love to do it. So it's one of those things where if somebody above me in the food chain gives me the go sign, we're ready to rock and roll on it. But until that happens, it's right now it's what we can say is, what is the roadmap to October? And then after that, it's what is the roadmap to November? What are we going to add?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm certainly interested to see how that shapes up.
Me too.
And once again, I am eager to have you or, like Steven or, someone from Digital Eclipse here when Goldmaster title number 2 is ready to be talked about.
Yep, absolutely.
So, we'll certainly be in touch when that time occurs. But in the meantime, Goldmaster title number 1, The Making of Karateka, is currently available on all major platforms. You can pick it up, for your gaming device of choice for $19.99 USD.
And there's a bundle currently going on Steam. Also, if you want that and Wizardry together, you can save. I think it's 15%. So if you're interested in both, that's the best way to do it.
Yeah. Yes. The bundle currently runs $42.48 USD.
There you go. Perfect.
Yeah. Right. So if you enjoyed today's interview, be sure to subscribe to the Fragments of Silicon channel and hit the notification bell in order to get clued in on we go live, in the future and all that business. And once again, Chris, it was lovely having you on the program, and I look forward to doing it again in the future. So on that note, coming up on the week ahead, let's see. We do have a new installment of Moonhawk Studios Presents happening in about 20 minutes-ish. It's always whenever Mac arrives kind of deal, but, the people who turn in regularly are probably used to that by now, or if they aren't, they will be. Anyway, coming up on Friday, September 22nd, we're having Victor Perdino of the Grimorio of Games on the program. He is the developer of Sword of the Necromancer, and we'll be talking about his latest game, Sword of the Necromancer Revenant, among others. And we also have the Sunday reviews coming up as well, with reviews slated for Plong, Duel Master Twilight Solitaire, Century City, and Bit Trip Rerunner plus Runner Maker. So look for that in the near future, and until next time, I shall wish you good gaming.